Kathy had always been fascinated by fashion. She loved the softness of fabrics, the elegance of delicate designs, and, above all, the feeling of comfort that came with wearing something she truly enjoyed. Since beginning her relationship with Trey, she had discovered that he shared more of her interests than she had initially realized. Both in their early 20s and recently finished with college, the couple often spent their free time exploring clothing shops and talking about new trends. Trey never seemed bored when Kathy wanted to visit her favorite boutiques. In fact, he gradually became genuinely interested in the details: different fabrics, colors, stitching, and the way certain garments were designed. What started as simple shopping trips slowly turned into something they both looked forward to. Kathy began noticing that Trey had a particular appreciation for soft, comfortable clothing. One evening, while they were relaxing at home, she casually suggested that he try a silky sleepwear set similar to what she was wearing. Trey was uncertain at first. The idea felt unfamiliar, and he hesitated before finally deciding to give it a chance. To his surprise, the material felt incredibly soft and relaxing. The experience changed his perspective, and he became more willing to experiment with styles he had previously dismissed without trying. Kathy was happy to see him becoming more open-minded, while Trey began realizing that comfort had little to do with the labels people attached to clothing. As time passed, their shared interest in fashion grew. They visited stores together, compared different materials, and discussed cuts and designs. Trey gradually became more confident about expressing what he personally liked. Instead of worrying about whether a particular garment was considered for men or for women, he began judging clothing by a simpler standard. Did he like it? Was it comfortable? Did it make him feel good? During the summer, Kathy introduced him to lightweight camisoles made from breathable, soft fabrics. She explained that many people liked them because they were comfortable and practical in hot weather. Trey decided to try one and quickly understood the appeal. His attitude toward clothing continued to evolve. He stopped viewing fashion through strict categories and began thinking more about comfort, quality, and personal taste. Kathy admired the confidence he was developing and was proud that he was becoming more comfortable being himself. Eventually, friends and relatives began noticing small changes in Trey's wardrobe. Most were curious rather than judgmental. His sister Kim, in particular, was completely supportive. She told him that he seemed happier and more at ease than he had been before, and to her, that mattered much more than what he chose to wear. One afternoon, Kathy and Trey visited a large lingerie store where their friend Tammy worked. While Kathy looked through the latest arrivals, Trey wandered around the shop, examining the fabrics and designs. Tammy noticed his interest and began chatting with him about clothing and comfort. Before long, the three friends were having an animated conversation about how differently people experience fashion. Trey admitted that he liked certain garments simply because they were comfortable, attractive, and well-made. Tammy and Kathy encouraged him not to let outdated expectations dictate his choices. They reminded him that everyone had different tastes and that there was nothing wrong with wearing something simply because it made him feel comfortable. Gradually, shopping became more than an activity Trey joined because he was dating Kathy. It became a genuine hobby of his own. He started learning about fabrics, sizing, construction, and the small details that made one garment feel better than another. The more he learned, the less self-conscious he became. He began to appreciate the freedom of choosing clothes according to his own preferences instead of worrying about how others might categorize him. Looking back, Kathy realized that their journey had never truly been about lingerie or fashion. It was about something much deeper: trust, confidence, acceptance, and the freedom to express oneself. Trey had become more comfortable with his individuality, and their relationship had grown stronger because they supported each other without trying to change one another. As they continued exploring fashion together, they encouraged each other to be authentic and comfortable in their own skin. That shared acceptance meant far more to them than any particular item hanging in a store. One afternoon, as they walked through the mall toward the parking lot, Kathy playfully tugged at the strap visible beneath Trey's shirt. "Looks like we're matching now," she joked. Trey rolled his eyes, but a reluctant smile appeared on his face. The situation still felt unusual to him. Just a few weeks earlier, he could never have imagined himself wearing something traditionally marketed toward women. Yet now he was walking through a busy shopping center and realizing that he wasn't nearly as uncomfortable as he had expected. During the drive home, Trey stared thoughtfully through the passenger side window. Did he really look different? Would anyone notice? And, more importantly, why didn't he feel as embarrassed as he had imagined? When they arrived home, Trey went upstairs to change before heading outside to mow the lawn. Kathy stopped him before he could change. "You don't have to change if you don't want to," she said. Trey laughed. "That's easy for you to say." Still, after a moment of hesitation, he decided to leave his outfit as it was and went outside. The afternoon passed peacefully until Kim arrived. Trey immediately assumed she would notice what he was wearing and expected an awkward conversation. Instead, Kim simply hugged him and began talking about work, family, and their plans for the weekend. She acted as though nothing unusual had happened. That simple reaction relieved much of the anxiety Trey had been carrying. Later that evening, Kim and Kathy sat together in the living room discussing fashion and personal confidence while Trey listened nearby. Their conversation wasn't about changing him or convincing him to become someone else. Instead, they encouraged him to make his own choices and discover what genuinely suited him. Their words stayed with him. For the first time, Trey stopped asking what certain clothes were supposed to represent. Instead, he began asking himself a much more personal question. What do I actually enjoy wearing? Over the following weeks, Trey continued experimenting. Some styles appealed to him immediately, while others felt awkward or simply weren't his taste. He learned that trying something new didn't mean he had to like everything. Little by little, he came to understand that he didn't need to force himself into a single category. Clothing could simply be clothing, something chosen for comfort, appearance, practicality, or personal enjoyment. One weekend, Kathy suggested another shopping trip with a few friends. Among them was Paul, a cheerful and self-assured man who had always been comfortable expressing himself through fashion. Paul had never been particularly interested in following traditional expectations. He wore whatever he liked and never seemed concerned about whether other people approved. As Trey spent time with him, he realized that confidence didn't come from fitting into a particular category. It came from being comfortable enough to make your own choices. For Trey, that realization marked the beginning of a new chapter. Fashion was no longer something he experienced only through Kathy. It had become a way to explore his personality, challenge assumptions, and understand himself a little better. And through it all, Kathy remained beside him, not pushing him in any particular direction, but simply reminding him that he was free to decide who he wanted to be. Paul's self-assurance stayed with Trey long after their shopping trip began. Trey had spent much of his life wondering how strangers might judge him, always thinking twice before doing anything that could attract attention. Paul, however, seemed untouched by those worries. He carried himself naturally, as though other people's opinions had no power over his happiness. As the group moved from one rack to another, Trey began noticing clothes he would normally have walked past without a second glance. He found himself interested in brighter colors, unusual designs, and cuts that felt unfamiliar yet strangely appealing. At one point, Paul emerged from a fitting room wearing a sharp formal outfit and immediately asked the others what they thought. Everyone joined in, offering playful suggestions and joking about the look. The atmosphere was relaxed and carefree. For Trey, something shifted. He began to realize that fashion didn't have to be a list of rules that told people what they were allowed to wear. It could simply be another form of creativity, a way to explore different sides of yourself. A little later, Kathy approached him with an outfit she thought might suit him. "You don't have to wear it," she said gently. "But if you're curious, there's no harm in trying it." The decision was completely his. Trey stood there for a while, considering the suggestion. Eventually, curiosity won over hesitation, and he decided to step into the fitting room. When he looked at himself in the mirror, he was surprised by what he saw. It wasn't that he suddenly looked like someone else. Instead, he was seeing a side of himself that he had never previously given permission to exist. For so long, Trey had believed his identity had to fit within a narrow set of expectations. Now, standing there, he understood that he was far more complicated, and far more free, than the image he had created for himself. This wasn't about becoming somebody new. It was about discovering another part of who he already was. When Trey finally returned to the group, Kathy, Paul, and the others greeted him with warm smiles. Their reaction wasn't about persuading him to change. They were simply happy to see him becoming more confident and comfortable in his own choices. For the rest of the afternoon, Trey felt an unfamiliar sense of freedom. He wasn't constantly thinking about labels. He wasn't trying to predict what strangers might say. He wasn't measuring himself against someone else's expectations. For once, he was simply enjoying the experience of figuring himself out. Over the months that followed, Trey continued exploring different aspects of fashion and personal style. Some days he preferred classic, traditionally masculine clothing. On other occasions, he enjoyed softer designs and more expressive looks. There was no strict formula anymore. He understood that his preferences could change from one day to the next, and that was perfectly fine. What mattered was that the decision was his. Kathy stood by him. Kim encouraged him. His friends accepted him. But the most important change had happened within Trey himself. He had learned to accept and support his own choices. What began as a simple interest in clothing had ultimately become a much deeper journey of self-discovery. Trey realized that genuine confidence doesn't come from conforming to someone else's idea of who you should be. It comes from accepting yourself, trusting your instincts, and giving yourself the freedom to explore who you truly are. That realization transformed his life in a way no single outfit ever could.